I had a good friend of mine at work, and he's just like, oh, you got to get into jiu-jitsu. You're a college wrestler. We watched UFC. And he's like, I'm going to get you 10 privates. You're going to love it. I promise it. So it won't cost you anything. You got to do it. So I'm like, all right. Go to the gym. It's up in New Haven. And I started doing the privates. I'm addicted to it. It's where I meet Marcio the first time. Spoke no English whatsoever. He comes down with me to the first competition. I end up taking third, run out of gas, don't know any jiu-jitsu. I'm basically just, I ran out there, I'm doing single leg takedowns, just holding the guy down for the whole period if I can do it. So they're like, listen, you can't just keep doing privates, you need to get into the class. And I couldn't drive to New Haven every day from Fairfield, just rush hour every day, couldn't do it. Marcio's opened up the gym in Norwalk. Easy, 10-minute drive down the Merritt. So I started going in there, and, that was it. And then the first time you go there, they're like, here's the address. First classes will open up at 6 o'clock. Meet you there. I'm like, yeah, definitely. Get off the Merritt on Main Street, 181. I'm like, all right, pull in the parking lot right in front of the steakhouse. And I'm like, all right, it's obviously in the strip mall here somewhere. I'm like, nah, hair place, nah, dentist, and the restaurant. So I'm like, all right, I'm here, right? I'm like, I'm right in front of the steakhouse. Blackstone Steakhouse, right? They're like, Blackstone Steakhouse, it's under the steakhouse. Now you gotta find the gym. I'm like, all right, so I'm like, I guess I'm gonna go in, maybe there's a stairway inside. So I got my gi over my shoulder, a duffel bag, flip-flops. I'm walking in. They're like trying to seat me at a table. I'm like, no, where's the gym? They're like, what are you talking about? So call up again. I'm like, am I getting punked? Like, where's the camera? And they're like, no, come around the back. Drive around the back, the hole in the parking lot, under the patio for the restaurant. You walk in, there's Gracie Sports. And, you've seen the place. And that's it. Like you said, like 100 gyms you've walked into, it's the 100th worst facility you've ever seen. 7-foot ceiling, open, pipes. You got the pipes, ductwork, all open. And when we'd be practicing judo throws, like you get two big guys and you'd bang your feet on the ceiling. There'd be people kicking the sprinkler heads for the sprinklers. And the walls, 3 of the walls, because it must have been like a yoga dance studio before that, glass, floor to ceiling, glass. So you'd be training every once in a while, you hear the everything stop, everyone's got their brooms, the vacuum, run around, clean it up. You take your red duct tape up that section of the glass, back to rolling. So by the end of it, except for maybe the 2 feet from the ceiling down, just red duct tape, red walls, solid duct tape, holding shattered glass in place, to save everybody.
So my name is Brad Wolfson, and I've been doing jiu-jitsu since 1999. I started at a place in the Hartford area, in Connecticut, where I was growing up, and so a couple of friends that were into the UFC at that point, when it was kind of in its infancy, and they decided that they would watch all the UFCs, and they decided that after this gentleman had come into a moto photo where my friend was working and seen some pictures, or shown them some pictures of himself training with the Gracies on this cruise. And my friend Eric decided that he would go, along with my other friend Greg, and start doing this because they had seen this stuff on this illegal cable scrambler that they were watching the UFCs on. And this guy came in with the pictures, and they recognized some of the guys, and they started talking. They decided that they were going to go check this training association, Gracie Jiu-Jitsu Training Association, that was opening up in where we grew up. And then about 6 months later, after just kind of going over their house all the time and just getting beat up on their lawn and just them talking about jiu-jitsu nonstop, and I decided that I would go along and check it out. And it wasn't love at first sight. It was like kind of just got beat up a lot. I was really out of shape. I wasn't very athletic. At that point I was, considerably heavier than I am now. And I was drinking and smoking and just being just generally like an unhealthy kind of guy. I was playing music. And so it wasn't an instant like, wow, I'm hooked on this right away. I'm naturally good at this. I was terrible at it. I just got my ass kicked over and over and over again. And then after, I don't know, probably the first year, it just started to click, and I started to kind of fall in love with it. And then slowly started to kind of change my lifestyle, started to exercise, started to kind of watch what I was eating. I just got kind of more and more fell in love with jiu-jitsu as the time went on. And that was like, almost 20 years ago now. And then here we are. So I met Marcio in 2007. I had just left the school where I was training, kind of had some issues with the guy that was my teacher at that point. And a few of the folks that were training with me were living in the area near Norwalk in Weston. It was actually Sandy Buccaro and her husband. And they were my students originally up here in New Haven. So they had, when the school closed up here and I had left and kind of gone on my way, they said, well, we're going to go check we heard this guy in Norwalk just moved here and he's supposed to be this really amazing guy. And I didn't know who it was at that point. And then a few months later, I found out that it was Marcio, and they had gone and trained with him, and they said, man, you got to check this guy out. He's incredible. This is like mind-blowing stuff. So I was at that point on crutches. I had knee surgery, so I couldn't train, but I'd kind of hobbled over there and watched class, and I was just like blown away by Marcio. And again, he didn't know me at all. It was the same thing. This big opposing guy comes to the door, and then he's like, gives me a big hug, and he's like, my brother, hey, great to have you here. And just the friendliest guy I ever met, super warm guy. And I just hit it off with him instantly. And that was 10 years ago. So been there ever since. And I got my black belt from him in 2011. And just awesome guy. When I went to Marcio's, I guess the thing that really was, for me, that was, really hit home was that a lot of the fundamentals that I had, the sort of basics that I had weren't that sound. I thought they were pretty good. I thought I knew self-defense pretty well. I thought I knew, my basics with guard passing and my position and all that stuff were good. But then when I started to go to his classes, I started to realize the things that he was making all these just very little subtle corrections in like the way I positioned my body and things I did. That made a huge difference. So, just really kind of relearning my fundamentals when I got there. And that was, I think, a big part of it was like, that was not only techniques I had never seen before, but a lot of the even really basic stuff that I hadn't really, done correctly when I was coming up. And no one was ever really correcting me at that point. So it was, that was the biggest thing was like, just kind of relearning the basics. Yeah, the warm-ups were, man, they were just brutal. They were just so brutal when I started. I mean, I think guys had to literally tell Marcio, like, hey, you got to tone it down because people just aren't showing up for the warm-ups or like coming in for one class and then just like never coming again because it was a tough place to be, and he was like, obviously like the friendliest guy in the world and the environment was good in the gym, but just then versus now, I mean, that was the biggest thing was like, wow, the warm-ups they're nice now. They're 5-10 minutes. We train, we do technique. It's great. But yeah, so like I was starting to say, like I think a lot of the cool thing about how he would help me in the old days when I was starting to kind of teach, and obviously that that in itself is a pretty nerve-wracking thing. You're like a purple belt, and you're teaching class, and this like sixth degree black belt at that point is watching you teach, and it's like you're out like. I would always get super nervous when Marcio was there, even though he'd always be like, "Oh, relax, bro, you're doing great." He's always like very, very like positive and encouraging to me to teach, and would give me a lot of like nice feedback when I did teach. But the thing I liked about it too is that when he would correct me after I showed something or I left out a detail or he wanted me to add something to it, he would always sort of do it off on the side of the room while everyone was doing while everyone was off, like, training and teach or, practicing the technique. So it was never like done in a way that was sort of belittling or like, to make you feel like, oh, you forgot this or whatever, or this is bad. You got to do it this way. My way's better. It was always like very like, this detail is very important. Make sure that it's this or that. So that to me was a really cool. And I try to carry that through, now that I'm a black belt and I'm obviously teaching full time, that with the guys that I'm sort of trying to mentor here to teach in the same way. because I think that's a really nice way to do it, you know. And I always appreciated the fact that he would always, he respected me enough, even though I wasn't anybody. I was just a purple belt, right? He respected me enough to sort of, you know, kind of mentor me in that way. You know, not to call me out in front of the class, like, you forgot to put this part of the move. This is very important, you know, like, you're dumbass, like, this goes here, you know. But he was always like very, like, bro, nice job, man. But, you know, the thing you could do is this is also important. You could put your hand here. You know, he would always sort of, you know, sort of do it in a way that was very gentle. I guess that's probably the best way to put it. So, you know, I credit him as a huge part of my, you know, that encouragement as a big part of me thinking that I could actually do this for a living. And then I remember that when I went to take that next step with it, when I was going to quit my job, you know, he was also very encouraging, you know, and he was basically like, look, this is what you want to do. This is what you were meant to do. This is what's going to make you truly happy. So do it, you know, because I was obviously nervous. I was quitting a career to go, you know, sit in a jiu-jitsu academy all day, and that can be a little bit stressful. But so he was, I think, a big part of that. But yeah, so we've been open almost 6 years now, and still growing. So.
My name's Charlie McShane. I've been doing jiu-jitsu for almost 17 years, and I'm a black belt under Master Marcio. There's two major things when I did my first private class with Marcio that stuck out. Number one is his personality. Before we even got to the mat, before we started doing anything technical, I was very welcoming. And my brother, this is your home. Feel at home, brother, you know. And that's not uncommon. That's everybody he talks to. It's just like that. So you get a very like welcoming feeling from him, which was 90% of why I liked him right off the bat. And then after that, you realize that, oh, he's like a real master. He's not just a guy who's trained for 35, 40 years and just stayed around, but he's a master. He knows his subject, right? So we did the class with him. He showed some really cool stuff. And at the end, he goes, let's play a little bit, brother. You go in my close guard and just try to pass. If you pass, starts again. Okay. Wrist lock, wrist lock, wrist lock, wrist lock. I never opened his guard, never got close to passing. It was just wrist, wrist, wrist. That was the order of the day. And it got to a point I had to put my hands behind my back because there was nothing else I could do. And then he choked me. But it was, you know, but that was so secondary. The fact that he could just own me in jiu-jitsu was so secondary to who he actually is. And he's one of those guys that as soon as you meet him and you're around him, you realize there's no falseness to him. That is the real Marcio you're getting right there. And I could tell immediately that this is going to be my teacher. When I came to Marcio, what I really liked about his specific style of jiu-jitsu was that he kind of straddles that line of traditional and new school or competitive. It's you know, so people like to firmly place themselves in one camp or the other and cross their arms and say, this is who I am. Well, Marcio understands that there's a middle ground, and that's exactly where he teaches. So he's a huge fan of the traditional Gracie self-defense, thinks it's very important for everyone to know that, but is not afraid to delve into brand new jiu-jitsu too. And he's super interested in that. He loves teaching it. And that really appealed to me because I don't find myself on either side of that either. I'm interested in all of it. So that was the idea that our two concepts of jiu-jitsu meshed was really important to me too. That was certainly an added bonus beyond everything else that he brings to the table. You know, a year and a half ago when we moved into this newer facility, I wanted to make sure that we had a specific jiu-jitsu room, and I wanted it to kind of pay tribute to the Macarra Jiu-Jitsu Association and to Master Marcio and to mimic his school down in Norwalk as closely as possible. So I made sure that we created just that. So this is our special jiu-jitsu room. Classic red and white. Very simple, very traditional. And I wanted it so, you know, when you come in here, you really get a sense that this is history. This is like the real thing, the tradition of of Master Marcio's Jiu-Jitsu. The interesting thing about Marcio, he is a 7th degree black belt. He's black belt under Hall's Gracie, the famous 5. But when he came here, nobody really knew who he was. And I think the reason for that is because he's not that self-promoter type guy. He's just not a guy who wants to talk about himself. So he needs people to do it for him, right? But there is a dawning of knowledge as you get to know him, and then you start to research him a little bit more. You're like, whoa, what's he doing here? Like, why is he in Connecticut? And you kind of get that sense. And I remember that distinctly. I mean, there was no hype around him when he came here, and so now, when you are introduced to him and you start training under him and you start to realize the depth of who he is and what he knows, it's all the better, because it doesn't come with any preconceived idea of who he is or what he's done. And then when you dig back into it, it's even more impressive who he was when he was competing in the 70s and 80s and beating everyone with triangles and everything. And it's just super cool to go back and learn that stuff. When I started doing jiu-jitsu, there wasn't YouTube, there weren't books, there were infrequent VHS tapes, right? But I think over the years, the role of a jiu-jitsu teacher has maybe shifted a little bit, because back in the day, you were sort of responsible for making sure, for your students' entire education in jiu-jitsu. And now you can rely on YouTube for a lot of that and for all these ancillary materials to help out. But it's almost now the role of the teacher to kind of curtail that and just say, that's good, but let's get back to what's most important, which are your fundamentals, your basics, and all that stuff, to try to dissuade eager white belts from doing stuff that's maybe out of their wheelhouse at the moment, and keeping things in perspective, And I feel that with Marcio, as much as he loves every aspect of jiu-jitsu, competitive and so on, he never strays so far that it gets into fantasy land, and he's good at keeping everybody really grounded and working on the stuff that's important. The thing that people need to understand about Marcio is that he's a package deal, because he comes with his wife Carla, and Carla is as big a part of the Gracie Sports recipe as anyone else, and it really is a family thing. He's got Deborah and Neiman and his wife, and she's always around, and everyone loves her, and she's over there running Juice Jitsu, the little acai bar that they got next to it, and she really adds to the overall environment and the atmosphere, the feeling that you get when you walk into Gracie Sports. I think it's as much Carla as it is Marcio. And I think the thing about Carla that is so important is that Marcio is not a guy who's going to talk about himself. He's not going to tell you about the tournaments he won. You got to pull that stuff out of him. Carla is not so reserved. So she will tell you, like, Marcio, you remember that time that you cleaned out that tournament? And, she will tell you the truth. And he downplays it. He's like, and they have there's a great interplay. Well, she's like, Marcio, you got to tell them. And he's like, no, it's not a big deal, and it's just, that's a real marriage, They're just huge supporters of each other, and it just works really well. It's fun to watch.